Hi everyone, today we are going to learn about osmosis. Osmosis is a super important concept in biology that explains how water moves in and out of the cells. Now to start with the basics, we'll first learn what the definition of osmosis is. Osmosis is the movement of water from a region of high water concentration to a region of low water concentration through a semi-permeable membrane. Now, why do we need to learn about osmosis, right? Osmosis is how cells absorb or lose water naturally. Now, we'll study more about the semi-permeable membrane because semi-permeable membrane is a crucial part of osmosis definition, right? So we need to learn what it is. Now, semi-permeable membrane is like a filter. It will allow these small molecules like water, carbon dioxide or oxygen to pass, but it will block the larger ones like proteins, ions, sugar or salt. You can take anything. Now, this is what helps osmosis happen in living things. So we can say that it is a requirement, a very necessary requirement for a semi-permeable membrane to be present. Now, if we need to understand the concept of semi-permeable membrane more clearly, we'll take an example. Now, we take a tea strainer. Now, tea strainer, what does it do? It simply blocks the tea leaves and lets the water pass, right? And that's how the semi-permeable membrane works. It lets water pass and blocks the bigger molecules. If we take the example of SPM in humans, cell membranes, they'll be a good example. Now, cell membranes, what do? They allow water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide to pass through them, but they block proteins, ions, and sugar. Now, I'm not saying they'll block these things permanently, only until there is a requirement inside the cell or outside the cell for these things. Okay? Now we should move on to the next topic. So here we know high concentration to low concentration through the help of a semi-permeable membrane. Now if we take an example from our daily life, we all know what raisin is. Raisin, if we take a shriveled raisin and an already plump raisin and put them in water, what happens to the shriveled raisin? It swells. Why? Because the shriveled raisin, it's like less water concentration, right? And now we know what osmosis occurs. It goes from high to low with the help of a semi-permeable membrane. So these raisins, the outer layer, it acts as an SPM and water moves from high to low. And the raisins are plumbed up. But what happens if we have an already plumped raisin? We are taking both case scenarios, right? So if we put an already plump raisin in water, it stays the same or sometimes becomes slightly plumper. I'll explain it also. Now here also there are two scenarios. We know already plump raisin has water inside it. But what if the water inside is equal to the water outside? With respect to water concentration, there will be no change. It will stay the same. But if the water inside is very less, or you can take minutely less, then the water outside will move in because it goes from high to low, right? Now raisin will become more plumper. Now here's the whole flow chart, and if you do have any doubts, you're free to message me on Instagram. I'll link my Instagram down below. Now if we need a more scientific explanation, we'll take a beaker, okay? And now we have put a partition or a semi-permeable membrane in between. Now side A has pure water and side B has sugar solution. Now we do know if we take the case of pure water, it has higher water concentration, and if we take side B, it has a lower water concentration because the water is mixed in with sugar, or it is associated with it, right? So the movement of water would be from side A to side B, high to low, through a semi-permeable membrane. Okay. Now here are some terms we should know. A solvent. What is a solvent? A solvent is a liquid that does the dissolving. That would mean it is the one with more quantity, right? Because it is the thing that is doing the dissolving. Example, water. Now if we take solute, a solute is a substance that dissolves and it would be in less quantity. Example, sugar or salt. Now, what is a solution? A solution is a mixture of a solute and a solvent. There are many types of solutions out there, but the most we'll talk about in your 11th and 12th would be a binary solution. Okay, and we have already studied about semi-permeable membrane. It allows only the small molecules like water to pass. Okay, now what is the difference between osmosis and diffusion? Osmosis is the movement of water from high concentration to low concentration through a semi-permeable membrane. And in case of diffusion, it is the movement of any molecule from a high concentration to low concentration. And the points to note here are water in the case of osmosis and a semi-permeable membrane, whereas in diffusion, we can talk about any molecule. Okay. Now, if we move on to the next topic, which is types of solution. Now, here I have a figure of osmosis in plant cells. This is clearly the cell membrane, and this is the cell vacuole. Okay. In hypertonic solution, the water goes out and the cell shrinks. Why? Because the cell we are taking into consideration has a high concentration of water. Now, if we move on to hypotonic solution, in hypotonic solution, the cell we are taking into consideration has a low concentration of water. So the water will go in and the cell will swell up. In isotonic solution, the concentration of water is equal in both cells and the water can move in or out equally, or there will be no change. The cells will stay the same. Now the next question that will go through our minds is, why is osmosis important? Why are we studying about it? Now osmosis is very important. For example, I've given a few examples here. Plants absorb water from soil through osmosis. So what do the plant roots contain? It contains salt and minerals, and the inside is less watery than the surrounding soil. So if we take a figure like this, okay, now we have a plant, like, pardon my drawing, I know it's very bad. So we have a plant, and this is clearly the root part, and here we have the surrounding soil. The root will have a high reserve for salts and minerals. But what about the soil? It will have a high water reserve. So potentially what can happen is the water, it will move from high concentration to low. The roots will absorb water through osmosis. Now, if we take a second example, that is, the kidneys use osmosis to balance water. Inside our kidneys, there is a structure which we call nephron. Now, nephron is the functional part. Okay, it filters blood. Now, what happens is, when our body needs to save water, the kidneys will pull water back from the waste during osmosis. So, how do they do this? The nephron, it creates a concentration gradient, which will allow the water to move back into the blood. Now, what sort of concentration gradient are we talking about here? We do know that osmosis will only occur if the higher water concentration is in the waste and low water concentration inside the kidneys. So what will happen? The water from the waste will move into the kidneys, and therefore our body will retain most of the water, right? And now if we talk about the third example, which is IV fluids. Now we do know that IV fluids, they go directly into our bloodstream. But as we studied here, the types of solution, what would be the most ideal IV fluid condition? Isotonic, right? Because if the IV fluid is hypotonic, it has too much water, the water will enter the cells by osmosis and the cell will swell up or burst. That will cause problems. And if the fluid is hypertonic, then the water will leave the cell and the cells will shrink, right? So the most ideal condition would be the IV fluids are made isotonic, same concentration as blood to keep the cells normal. Now, what can we say? Osmosis is balanced. There is no net movement of water, right? I'm saying that only in this case osmosis is balanced because as we studied, IV fluids have to be isotonic. Now we have our IV fluid stream and a blood stream, right? So what will happen? IV fluids will go into the bloodstream, and it's not ideal, but the blood can also come into the IV, right? And if they will both cancel each other out, and there will be no net movement of water. So now to recap, what did we study in this lesson? First of all, we studied the definition of osmosis. The movement of water from high concentration to low concentration through a semi-permeable membrane. The semi-permeable membrane part was very important. After that, we took a real-life example for raisins, and we also took both examples, a normal raisin, shriveled up, and an already plumped raisin, right? After that, we studied about the types of solutions and also some terms you have to remember. Those terms are very, very important, right? After that, we studied the difference between osmosis and diffusion. And then some important examples for osmosis. Now to end this lecture here, I'll just say osmosis is all about balance. It moves the water where it is needed through a semi-permeable gate. It happens silently, but it keeps the plants alive, our cells healthy, and our bodies in perfect hands. Thank you so much, and if any of you have a doubt about anything from these past two lessons, you can always message me or email. Hope you like the video.